most Americans either one can't afford therapy, private therapy, and two, there's a certain stigma around even seeking out help, right? So even if you can't afford it, you probably don't want to go because then it makes you seem weak or incapable. And when I started the Mental Happy brand and community, I wanted it to be a place that completely destigmatizes um, finding help. And in a way, we do that in a way where if you find people who are just like you, or even better yet, people who have overcome a particular struggle that you're currently struggling with, it makes that thing a lot less powerful or scary.
So take me back to childhood, Tamar. Was this you said that you experienced anxiety at a pretty young age? Um,
Mhm.
was this kind of your childhood dream to run your own corporation and help people, or what was? Take me back to when you were a kid. What were your big dreams then?
I wish I had big dreams as a kid. I think my biggest dream was that I wanted to be Little Mermaid. That was like my biggest dream. I specifically remember my mother asking me like, "Oh, what do you want to be when you grow up?" And I was like, she was a baker for like 20 years at a local supermarket, and I was just like, well, if I can't be Little Mermaid, then I guess I'd be a baker like you. And then she's like, no, you gotta like, have a bigger dream, a bigger vision. She's like, maybe something like a doctor or a lawyer. And I had never, I had like 4 or 5, I'd never heard the word lawyer. So I definitely heard the word doctor because I used to go there, right? So
Right.
I was just like, yeah, sure, doctor. But I think looking back, what I was really saying is, definitely at my core, I feel like I am a healer.
You are listening to What We Should Have Learned in School. My name is Amy Leo. You are listening to What We Should Have Learned in School. And today's guest is someone I'm incredibly excited to bring on. We've talked about this for already, I think, 3 or 4 years, Tamar. So
Right.
I have with me the CEO and founder of Mental Happy. So, Tamar, before we even get into anything more, do you want to introduce folks to what Mental Happy is and what you've been up to working so hard at these past few years that we've known each other?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Yeah, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are on the internet and in the world. My name is Tamar Blue. I am the founder and CEO of Mental Happy. Mental Happy is an online platform and community that allows people to participate in private group chats with other peers. It allows you to have access to what we call like mini e-courses. They're about 15 to 20 minutes where you can learn valuable life skills, anything from like gratitude, how to talk to yourself positively. The group and the communities are moderated by community guides that are awesome people who've been part of the Mental Happy community for a while, and then also licensed professionals, and they can be anyone from a licensed therapist or mental health professional, or even physicians and doctors participate in the community as well. We like to think of ourselves as the AA groups for mental health and wellness support.
That's perfect. That's originally how we came across each other's lives all those years ago. But
Right.
but Tamar, what really inspired you to create Mental Happy? What's your personal story around mental health?
Yeah. So I always tell people like I'm always working on healing my anxiety. It's just something that you have to be mindful of and really strive to keeping, any type of emotional or mental struggle in balance. And one of the things that I noticed is that when it started happening to me at a very young age, and I would have like panic attacks and anxiety attacks, I didn't really know like one what it was. I didn't really have the language to even explain it, and two, I didn't have the tools or the resources to help me cope with it. I think looking back, what I was really saying is, definitely at my core, I feel like I am a healer. So, and I enjoy all things progressive about healing, about getting better. I think the body is just this magical thing that we've like yet to tap into. And the mind, a lot of neuroscience psychologists, even regular physicians now are all confirming that it really is the mind that leads the body. Whereas, traditional pathology taught us like, the body just responds to everything else that is happening, where it's like, no, the mind leads and then the body follows.
Oh my goodness, that's a perfect segue. Tomorrow we couldn't have scripted that better because that, of course, as you know, that's what I'm passionate about in my work as well. And really looking at the power of how subtle our mind is, that there are so many beliefs we have about the world and about ourselves that we aren't even aware of. So
Hmm.
I have recognized, and I'm very grateful that we're having a larger discussion about race in the United States.
Hmm.
So can you share a little bit of your experience with race? Let's start maybe from here. What's one of, there's many, but what's one of the biggest misunderstandings you personally have come up against in your life when it comes to race in America?
Yeah, I think I'm fortunate enough to not have experience like extreme like violence, the violent side of racism, right? But it doesn't say it doesn't exist, and it doesn't mean that I haven't encountered circumstances where I was like terrified of what this person is likely to do just because of an assumed belief. And I think that's where people on both sides are right now. It's just everyone is absolutely terrified of what they assume the other person did, is capable of doing, likely to do. Um, but it is, I think, day to day, especially being a person in business.
Mm,
We started Mental Happy with very little capital. We not only produced an idea, but we stood up a legitimate business that has, paying customers on an individual level and paying customers on a corporate level. And still, the frustration is, people question it a lot. Like, is this a credible thing? Is it, there's just like all these validation filters that as a person of color, you often don't get the benefit of the doubt,
mm,
right? You could be, I graduated from college, I've traveled the world, I've gone to like Y Combinator, which is like the top accelerator of the world. People like to say it's like the Harvard of accelerators. And still it's like, a credibility questioning type. There's just so many more processes that we have to go through as people of color. So that's like my personal experience in business, and oftentimes it can feel like those extra hurdles and those extra closed doors make your journey and process that much longer,
yeah.
whereas it's not for white counterparts.
Yeah. So, yes. And I think what I've learned, so I will be 100% honest on this. I think that's the only way that we can move forward
Hmm.
and begin to really look at what's been going on and what still
Right.
goes on.
Right.
Because what I sometimes hear from folks in my white communities is like, oh, well, we had a black president, like racism.
Hmm.
We dealt with that in the 60s.
Hmm.
And I was curious if you could speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, so fair, there is good progress, right? Because you do have to give it some level of positivity. Um, but what is happening now, and what's still happening, there is still, you know, the fragrant, violent racism. I mean, there was like someone was lynched a couple weeks ago, and a couple weeks before that, someone else. And some, like, in the last 2 months, there's been like 6 or 7 lynchings reported that are just notated as, oh, it was a suicide. In public, probably not, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So there is extreme violence. And I think what people, I like to put myself in other people's shoes. And if I were a white person about 60 something years old, and I would say, well, oh, it's not like the 60s anymore. They're thinking from the extreme perspective of like dogs chasing people and, hoes, and you can't sit in the same section. So they're thinking like, oh, okay, well, these things aren't happening to these people anymore. They should be grateful and move on because we have. But the problem is, much like, viruses, and to put this in like complete perspective for everyone and what we're dealing with now, it evolves and it changes and it becomes smarter over time, right? Because it's a learned organism. And that's what racism has become. It is evolving into different things. Whereas once it was just, flat out slavery and like ownership of people, now, and then once those people became free, it then became, okay, they're living in their own towns and areas and neighborhoods like Tulsa, Oklahoma. We're going to burn it down because now they have their own banks and, bakeries and businesses and stuff like. We don't want them to progress. Well, that has changed to, okay, well, they work in the same places as we do, but I'm the manager, I'm going to look over them for being promoted, which happened to me, you know? So, or it rolls into, well, we're least likely to give these, a group of people funding for their venture, their business, more so than their white counterparts. So the flat out racism that on some levels still exists, because obviously there was like the George Floyd incident. And there's also now this virus of racism that has transformed into a different strain known as covert racism. Whereas, you can't get that bank loan. You didn't get approved for that job. There are other systematic ways of keeping a group of people down. Yeah, and one thing I do want to touch on, because I do notice this quite a bit with, especially like, some white friends that I have like on social media, Facebook or what have you. It's just what's upsetting the most, I'd say, to the Black community, and I really hope people like understand this and hear this. It's like, it is the people who are like in between, right? The people who are like, oh, well, I can support police officers and, not approve of like the looting and still be upset that someone died. It's like, I'm really of the motto, like, if you don't stand for something, like, you know what I mean? Like, you're just saying that you don't stand for it, right? So it's almost like, it's almost a disregard for human life. And while we can't control things like, tens of thousands of people out in the street looting, because it's just a massive group of people at one time, where no matter what you're doing, if you're under arrest, you shouldn't die. Like, how many white people themselves, how many listeners right now, from the time you were teenagers to adults, were arrested and you didn't die, right? So that's like fundamentally, the issue. Like, it's just, as a people, like, we don't care about all the other things. And the reason why we don't care about all the other things, like the looting, the this and that, is just those businesses have insurance. We can't control tens of thousands of people, but we should, on a basic human level, care more about human life than things, right? Than like damage. And I'm saying this as a business owner, and I'm also saying this as a business owner who has been looted. so so I I get it. I get it. It is not, it is an offset of something that happened. It's not the thing. It's just, we should be looking at what triggered the thing from happening. It's just like, even with your field in, health and psychology, right? Usually what people are experiencing, the symptom is not the thing you should often treat. It's the root trigger of why this person is exhibiting a particular behavior. Like you can treat the cold, but prime example, I used to get colds all the time. It's because I am lactose intolerant, and the bacteria in milk would make me sick. So I was often treating the cold, but the thing is, the milk was the root cause of me constantly getting, tonsillitis and being in that cycle of being sick. Well, once I treated that, I didn't have the offset. So the issue with the whole, I support the cops, I don't like the looters, but I'm also upset, that someone died at the hands of, like, just being all three just means that you stand for nothing. Because there is a systematic issue. And if you and all your friends have been arrested and no one died, but another group of people can count on one hand in their short 20, 25 years on this earth compared to your 55, 61, 62 years on this earth, and no one and they know someone, it's like we have to call it, we have to really stand up and call it for what it is.
So, in 4.5 years of doing this podcast show, I must have muted myself when Tamar was speaking. So, you won't really hear my questions, but Tamar does kind of answer the question. So, you'll kind of have an idea of what I was saying, and we will proceed with the interview from that vantage point. Let's tune back in.
Yeah. And people, you touched on something there, when you were like, you like TLC, you liked your Addie doll. That's another thing that I notice, non-Blacks and non-colored people do often, is they associate the things that they love with positivity. So it's like, well, I love, Beyonce or something like that. And, this guy was, in the case of George Floyd, oh, he was guilty of, giving a counterfeit bill. Well, he never made it to court because he died, so we don't know exactly. But still, I mean, the one kid, I can't even remember his name. He shot, like, individually, one by one, people, a mass shooting in a church, and they stopped to give him Burger King. So it's like, again, what we're arguing about is that both colors, all colors, run up against the same bad behavior, but disproportionately one group's bad behavior, or not, ends in, because oftentimes, like Breonna Taylor was asleep. Like, she was just hanging out in her house asleep, so one group just disproportionately gets punished by death. And in recent years, it's been in public. Like, how many more murders are we going to be desensitized to, watching it as if we're watching it on TV? Because that's what social media and live stream has become. It's become like, primetime television. And we just, as human beings, have to say, this really isn't right. Like, if anybody has ever, like, suffered a loss of any kind, even if you lost your dog, you lost a loved one, like, what the pain of hurt and losing someone. And at the end of the day, a small human being, a daughter, has lost a father. And on a human level, no matter what your color, everyone experiences, some type of loss. And I get it, because I have so many white friends who are very vocal, who aren't silent at all, who aren't, Karens or in the middle or anything. And they get a lot of, flat. Can we curse on this show? I don't know. They get a lot of, shit from their friends. They get a lot of bullying, they get a lot of hazing. Some people get disowned from their families. So I can certainly understand why there's so many people in the middle and afraid to really express how they feel, because you end up losing your circle of people over a group of people that you're like, I mean, these people don't even know me. You know what I mean? I'm not, I'll never be accepted as a Black person, no matter, no matter how vocal or loud I speak up for them. You know what I mean? Like, so I 100% get it. You're speaking up for a group of people that you're nothing like, probably. It's not like you'll truly like fit in the sense of like high school. You know what I mean? I'm not talking about on a human level, just being part of a group. And you're disowning friends and family and people you've known for decades and your inner circle. um, and most of America lives in places where there really aren't any Black people or any diverse cultures. So it's like, speak up for what? Like, there's no Black people here. So that's the other thing. It's like they don't feel obligated to, because, where you live in like Idaho, Arkansas, South Dakota, wherever, but things are changing, because for the first time in history, there were protests in all 50 states, including those places where we assumed, there was lack of diversity or lack of color. So I'm very proud of just all Americans for that. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Right, 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 right. Yeah, I think what I love, I've been seeing this a lot on LinkedIn. People have been giving like long, very specific descriptions on behaviors that fall into the racism bucket. So again, if you are now, 60 something years old, and you grew up in an era where it's like, or 70 years old, you grew up in an era where whites couldn't sit next to Blacks, or they couldn't vote, and you've seen those things, and you've seen what racism looked like back then. You just kind of assume, well, I don't do those things, so I'm not a racist. But again, racism has evolved. It's evolved by a lot. And there are so many other things um, that fall into unconscious bias, because we're all a product of how we were raised in the environment and how we grew up. Um, Commonalities make us feel safe. So, you're likely to hire a white person. You read only white literature. You've never read a single book written by a Black person. um, maybe outside of Oprah, you've never read anything else. Um, and you don't make a conscious effort to like really recognize, like, okay, if this particular person is being marginalized, like, how could I participate in changing that narrative? If a white person moves in next, if a Black person moves in next door and you move, you're racist. But people just see that as, oh, I'm not racist, I'm just moving to a new neighborhood. No. you're you're racist. If you see a Black person walking down the street and you like clench your purse, you're racist. Like, oh, well, I'm just protecting myself. Your behavior is a deep-seated fear. It's a trauma from somewhere, and that trauma either belongs to you purely, but oftentimes it doesn't. It comes from learned previous behaviors.
Of
Mhm.
what we're talking about. I remember
Mhm.
being really horrified. A friend of mine I went to college with, this was back in 2016, I think, where a lot of murders have been made public. Again, Trayvon Martin, for instance,
Yeah,
Eric Gardner, things like
yeah.
that. And he had just written, honestly, on his Facebook about, I picked up this habit when I was about 11 or 12 years old, where I walk very slowly out of a store and I make sure my hands are out of my pockets.
Wow.
And what was so interesting is reading the comment section for me, like how many white men and women were saying, "Oh no, don't worry, me too," or like I do that too, and it's like, oh, or the
You do not do that.
right. You see though, but it's like a defense. It's like a community defense mechanism that I think with actually better education of mental health actually is a great segue for that of better understanding. If we better understand how our
Yeah.
brains work, it allows us to become aware
Hmm.
of these things maybe in a way that we're
Right.
more likely to change the behavior instead of
Yeah.
continuing to deny or disregard the
Yeah.
experience of other people in America.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
I think
others.
there are a lot of things working towards the collective change
Yeah,
because so many white people are also either directly or adjacently part of a marginalized groups.
right.
I don't care what age you are. If you grew up hardcore in the 60s, you might now have kids or grandkids who are LGBTQ
Right.
IA now, and now
Exactly.
it is important, and you love those individuals, right? And you don't want people to treat them badly or beat them up or even kill them,
Yeah.
for what it is that they want to be. So I think a lot of I'm a true believer that shared pain is the purest way as human beings that we can learn to like empathize with each
Yeah.
other. So once we all have this sense of we're experiencing something, even with the coronavirus, I think it's very opportune that this is all happening in the era of the coronavirus, right? Because we also now have a shared, you know, common enemy. Now we truly know we are globally connected because something on
Yes.
the other side of the planet has affected us all here. And then same with the protests here in the United States. Like the protests here triggered protests all over the world.
Yeah.
In like
Yeah.
almost every major country, there was a protest.
Yes. Even in Finland,
So yeah,
where my
you told me
husband
that. Yeah, you told me that even
so
even in Finland, like,
like
so because at the end of the day, we are seeing murders in real time.
yeah.
Like when
Yeah.
you grew up in the 60s or the 50s or whatever, you did not on a mass level experience someone dying right in front of your eyes.
Yeah.
You did not on a mass level as a parent to the way. So me the reason why I would be alarmed as a white person today, no matter how I felt about color before, my kids just watched someone, die on social media.
Right.
Like that would be absolutely alarming because as a parent, the only thing you'd want to do, with your kids is like, even when I watch other people's kids, like I don't want them being exposed. Like San Francisco is a crazy place. Like I don't want them being exposed to something that, you didn't talk about, you weren't prepared for. Now
Yeah.
they've got all these questions. And now because kids are in the purest form of who we are as adults, they are outraged,
Mm.
right? They're
Yeah.
upset and they're angry and they don't know why it happened, you know, and they want answers. So I think just as again, it's just not even as race. It's just on a human level. You saw something bad happen to another human. Like if this was a puppy, this guy was had his neck on for 8 minutes. Like, come
Yeah.
on, white people, you guys would be up in arms.
Yeah. Yeah.
You'd be so angry,
Yeah.
so you have to question yourself and say, what is it that I'm hanging on to,
Mm.
and does it currently serve me today?
Oh, that's great. That's a great distinction, Tamar. Awesome. I think that's going to lead me to, oh goodness, I could fumble around talking about this for ages. One thing that I have to say, um, I've always been really curious and passionate and wanting to connect, and I've always been so petrified to do it as a white woman. And I have to say this, I've gotten over it. I've gotten over myself. So thank you
That's
for
good.
being my first experiment into that. I'm not even proud.
Yeah,
Look, I mean, this is awesome. I remember in my master's
yeah,
program in
and
school, I
me
would get
too.
so worried.
I can, there was a time when I was a teenager, I couldn't like rationally, like just sit down and kind of just talk it out with
Yeah.
someone of an opposite color. Like I would just get so mad, just get so angry. And now it's like, okay, how can I lovingly express to this person that, I just want to be seen.
Yeah.
I'm not seeking revenge for 400 years, and I my background is from Haiti. The indigenous people on the island of Hispaniola on the Haiti side, now it was a violent slaughter of whites to get them off the island and so that they can get their freedom, right? I don't believe in violence.
Just
But
clarifying, don't take
to
that out of
cla-
context.
don't take that out of
CEO
context.
believes in no, no, no.
Right.
Yeah.
but but I can understand their rage and their pain for 100 years, right? But I think, again, as we're evolving as human beings, there has to be. I think language is the best gift we have as human beings. It's so special and it's so powerful. And I think if we can just kind of talk about it, even if you say the wrong things, even if you're like, I know I'm not going to say this correctly,
Yeah.
but this is what I think. What do you think?
Exactly.
And so many white people have never received an education on this. They've lived in a place where whatever they believe, whatever they think is right.
Right.
So
Right.
there's nothing wrong
Right.
in now questioning that. Because now the whole world isn't like when it was just a couple hundred people in your podunk town in the 50s. Okay, but now it's like people in Finland are also
Yeah.
saying this is
Finland.
not right.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is not right. People all over London, all over the world,
Yes.
in Asian countries are saying like this is not how we should be as a people. So it's like it's warranted to at least question it
Yeah, exactly.
calmly, nicely, lovingly, and with
Yes.
empathy for each other.
Yeah. That's been my most effective conversations within my own race is when I just get off my high horse and I really ask, why do you think this way? And it allows me to connect in a way that I didn't used to. I used to be very angry and outraged, and I didn't understand why people didn't understand. you know,
Right.
like and getting the
Right.
flack of being like called a Mother Teresa and the N word lover. I mean, I have
Oh
experienced that in my
man.
life, like a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
Really made to feel wrong. Now, again, I'm not saying that that is in any way comparable to being a different
Mm.
race at
Yeah,
all.
yeah.
But again, what you beautifully pointed out, we're recognizing that we are taking a courageous act to really get
Hmm.
educated and really to start showing up in bigger ways within our own circles. You know,
Yeah, I've even gotten the question like, "Can I be excited about Juneteenth?" You know, I've had white people like, "Can I celebrate June? Like, can I post it on my social media?" Like, I think the biggest thing is like people who are supporters um don't know, like, okay, is this like crossing the boundaries? It's like their thing. Can it be like our thing? Can I ask these questions aloud? And you certainly can, because if you don't ask, if you don't say something, if you're not, proud of something, horrible ending, as everyone else, like there's just been, from the history of time, there's just been so many white people on the side of like civil rights, right? It
yeah,
wasn't all black people.
yeah, yeah,
um so I definitely don't see the extreme side of, well, they're not allowed to celebrate this with us, or they're not allowed to be excited about, I think if you're spreading the message in a way that's supportive and truly honors what it is, and the purpose, and also educating your own community
exactly.
on why you posted, or have something to say about it. I think that's all that matters.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I will say, for some resources for folks, you may be as
Yes.
shocked as I am. One resource that was really helpful and eye opening for me was a book by Debbie Irving. I actually had her on the show a few years ago. It's called Waking Up White. And it's
Mhm,
about
mhm.
finding my story of race, basically. And she recounts, not a big spoiler alert, but um, she recounts, going to this kind of training program where they're going to talk about race. And she was so shocked that they were going to talk about her race, her racial identity, and how that had shaped things. And again, looking into how much has happened. to create this systemic issue. It's not only police brutality and mass incarceration. That's one piece of what I'm learning and learning it more every day
Yeah.
of a
Right.
much larger situation. But the thing is, you can't talk about that intelligently if you don't know, right? It's like if you don't know what you don't know,
Hmm.
where are we? We're chasing our tails in ego and defense. So
Right.
there's always that potential. I think we've modeled it tomorrow, right? I think we've done as good as we can.
Yeah, yeah, for
you know?
sure. I think we've done as good as we can, for sure. It's just a conversation to see, a pulse of like where we are as a people. But I think anyone asking the questions, even if they ask them wrong at first, um, shouldn't be shamed because
Yes.
even a decade ago, this many white people weren't asking questions.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, with that, is there one thing that you would want white allies to take home, or people that are in the middle? Is there one thing that you want to really share with them, or anything before we close out today that would be helpful versus unhelpful? Actually, you know what? Can we reverse that? Let's reverse that question. Okay, so I'm going to reverse the question actually. What are a couple things that are
Okay.
actually unhelpful, perhaps, that you've seen from the white community? Things that they may feel is helpful, but actually is kind of unhelpful.
I think the movement of, um, especially, what I've seen in like people like applying now, all of a sudden it's like all the candidates of color, and it's like you're just kind of taking the meetings or you're taking the interviews just because it's like trending, but you don't have any like real intentions on, whatever it is, investing or hiring or promote whatever it is. It's just the act of saying, you did it. That's not helpful.
Yeah.
um
Perfect.
what else? I think saying things like, oh, like filler statements like, oh, I stand in solidarity, but you know you don't, because everybody in your company's white.
Yeah. Right. Right.
you
Yep.
know
Yep.
so I think if you are standing in solidarity, or at least you wish to change that, I think making actionable, instead of a statement, just make actionable steps on what it is that you're planning on, doing. Um, the other thing that I've seen, when it comes to like investing in companies, it's like, oh, I want to help them out. So no one wants to be helped out. People want to know, like, you know you're investing in this thing because you believe it. Like, it's not charity,
Yeah.
it's investment. So
Mm,
things like that, I think, are assumed to be helpful, but they're more demeaning than anything. And I can see how frustrating. I'm doing my best to like try to help out, but not even that is good enough. It's
right.
like
Right.
we've just gotta keep the dialogue open and being patient with like understanding each other. It's not a one shot. Now I get you, you get me,
Yes.
um, kind of thing. So that's what I would say.
Awesome. Is there anything in particular that you found to be helpful? Anything? Well, you've kind of said, kind of walk your talk, basically. Talk your walk your talk. That's the right verbiage.
Yeah, yeah, and I would say, evolve a little. Like, challenge your friends, challenge your family. Like, you're a grown person. Just on a human level, one of the best things I did for my life is figuring out like who I am outside of like my friends and my family and
Mhm.
the 10 square blocks that I grew up in Florida. Um, and sometimes you just have to kind of contest and challenge these things that you were told. Is this something I truly understand, or is this something I was told? And uh, and what about it to me?
And we're here and we're back. Ta-da!
Uh,
The ending. But yeah,
sorry.
no, no worries. I think it would be really good just to ask. also where folks can find out more about you and Mental Happy because you're still fundraising right now for Mental Happy, right?
So Mental Happy currently has an equity crowdfunding campaign that is open right now on startengine.com/mentalhappy. Anyone can invest as little as $100 or more. More is dependent on your income, your salary. And all the rules are set by the SEC, um, the Securities Exchange Commission. So they make the rules. We follow them so that you're legally safe. We're legally safe. But it's great because what's fantastic is now for the first time in history with equity crowdfunding, people are able to take control of their own financial life, right? So it takes down that you have to be a professional investor, you have to be a venture capitalist to really, invest and build wealth for yourself. Investing in a startup company, I will be totally transparent, is risky. It definitely has risks. It has fantastic rewards. It's like trying to get to Mars. Like it's so much fun. It's a wild ride. And it's very ambitious goals, but we're really working to create a world of better mental health for people to have access to it. And for us, it's a mission that we just can't afford not to take. I definitely thank everyone for listening. I thank the people who didn't get scared and just turned this off because it's an uncomfortable conversation. I actually love uncomfortable conversations. I think it sparks a lot of growth and understanding. So thank you guys for the opportunity for really just allowing me to kind of share my very human experiences. You can learn more about us at mentalhappy.com and the work that we're doing. And I just hope that you guys all stay safe out there.
Perfect, Tamar. Thank you so much. And I'll put it in the show notes too.